Brexiteers! It's a privilege to be here with you tonight. I'm so pleased to be here. It's only a few weeks ago I was actually in Tynemouth and Whitley Bay having a nice long weekend. It's a great part of the world, hidden gem of the northeast Gateshead. But we're here tonight for one thing, and that's to make a really big noise so they can hear us down in number 10. And don't forget, this is being live streamed. The first rally we had, 127,000 people watched it live at home. So we need to send a big message to those people too. So here we are in Gateshead. I started my personal Brexit journey a long time ago. 40 years ago when I first started my career, whatever role I've been in since, however senior, for my sins I've always been given the job of liaising and dealing with Brussels. I knew exactly what they were about, what they were doing, what game they were up to. And that's why I chose to vote Leave in 2016. And you know, in that year, I also had another experience because I was Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. And I was so appalled at the lies and the deceits of Project Fear that I decided to speak out at our national conference. And that my organisation got such a lot of pressure from number 10 Downing Street, who went absolutely mad, that actually I decided to resign because they wanted to shut me up and I wanted to speak out and campaign to leave the EU. And that's what I did in 2016. I resigned to speak out. But who would have guessed it, that we're here 2.5 years later, after the biggest democratic vote ever in the history of this country, still having to reboot the People's Army to fight to leave the European Union. On that ballot paper, it did not say, do you want to remain in the EU or do you want a fudge deal where we're half in and half out? It didn't say, do you want to remain in all the institutions of the European Union and pay them £39 billion for the privilege? £600 for every man, woman and child in the country. It said, just leave. And that's what we should do. We should just leave. Anyway, I can tell you I'm proud to be here with you tonight. I'm proud to be British, and I'm proud to be the chairman of Leave Means Leave. And we want to send a message to Theresa May that leave really does mean leave. So we've got a great lineup of speakers for you tonight. But before we meet the speakers, I want you to meet our Vice Chairman and the founder of Leave Means Leave, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Tice.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. We know why we're here, ladies and gentlemen, because we are so appalled, distressed, furious at the way this government has negotiated the process of leaving. They've come up with this woeful proposal, Chequers. It's the worst of all worlds, ladies and gentlemen. Believe it or not, it's actually worse than staying in. So we need to do one thing with Chequers. We need to chuck Chequers. And then, if Chequers wasn't bad enough, ladies and gentlemen, just this week, the Prime Minister's come up with the next genius idea. I tell you what, let's extend the transition period that we don't even need in the first place. She now wants to extend it by a few months. What she actually means is at least a year. And every year that it would be extended, it's another £20 billion. £20 billion. And she says it as though it's a round of drinks. When I founded Leave Means Leave straight after the referendum, I naively thought we might be needed for 6 months or so to help support the government. Little did I realise, here we are, 2 and a bit years later, and we've had to relaunch the campaign to leave. We've had rallies up and down the country. We've had huge support. And yes, good news, the battle bus is back. And you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, the fun we had deciding what to put on the side of the bus. Well, look, I'm a bit bullish, I'm a businessman. I was all up for putting a big number on the side. A really big number. I wanted to put save 39 billion. I may need to rethink that. We may need to now put save 59 billion. Unbelievable. Anyway, believe it or not, the team outvoted me. And yes, I believe in democracy. The thing is, ladies and gentlemen, don't let anybody tell you that we can't do anything about this. We can. There's still time for all of us and our friends, our family, fellow leavers to make a difference. We can write to our MPs. We can go to their constituency surgeries. And we can say to them, chuck checkers, and we believe in Britain. We have the confidence to know that we are a great nation. And we can, of course, stand up as a great nation and trade with the rest of the world. We all know in business, no deal is better than a bad deal. And we've got another simple slogan. No deal, no problem. And it's even more now, ladies and gentlemen. No deal, no problem, no money. So, we have got some great speakers. The first speaker is a Labour MP from Vauxhall since the late 1980s. She is one of the most passionate Brexiteers. She's also one of the bravest MPs in the House of Commons. For being a Brexiteer, she has suffered abuse, vilification, attempts to deselect her, all sorts of manner of things. She's just standing up for what she believes in and what she knows is right. It's a huge pleasure to have her with us here tonight. And before we welcome her to the stage, let's just look at a few clips of her in action.
In his final sentence, where he said that we should be staying in the customs union and we should be staying in the single market, what he really was saying, we should be staying in the EU. You may think I'm talking absolute nonsense. There's 17.5 million people out there who don't think I'm thinking actually, anyone who votes against this principle of the second reading is really betraying the will of the British people.
Please welcome to the stage, Kate Hoey, MP.
Thank you very much indeed for that wonderful welcome, and it is a real privilege to be appearing on a cross-party platform, because I think all of us in this platform believe that our country becomes before our party. Now, I know most politicians say that they're always delighted to be somewhere, wherever they're speaking. But I genuinely am delighted to be here in Gateshead because, of course, 3 days before the referendum, we had a wonderful rally here in this very hall. And we were on that platform, I was on that platform. It was a very emotional evening. It was leading up to that hugely important vote a few days later. And the enthusiasm, the absolute determination of people who came up to us afterwards, who were going out to vote, some of them for the first time, it made us go back, and certainly made me go back to London, feeling so strongly that we were going to win. But you know, in London, they didn't know that. They don't get out of London, most of the people who are leading on the Remain campaign. And I remember being on a programme 2 days before the referendum, and the political editor of The Spectator and the political editor of The New Statesman both said that they thought Remain was going to win. And I said, no, we're going to win, Leave is going to win, and you two should get out of London more. Now, we really don't want to be here tonight. I'm sure there's a lot more things that you would all be doing and rather doing, but we're here because we're sending this very simple message that we are not prepared to allow the votes of 17.4 million people in the biggest ever vote that there was in this country to be ignored, to be absolutely turned round. And we're here to say that we know what we want and we know what people voted for. They voted to leave, and we are going to leave, and we're going to make sure that the government sticks to the commitment that was given by the previous Prime Minister, by Parliament, and by everyone, including all the leading Remainers, that leave meant leave. It actually makes me very angry that people who were passionate, determined, knew exactly what they were voting for, are now being told by the patronising voices of usually the establishment somewhere that they didn't really know what they were voting for, that they were actually quite stupid, that they weren't enlightened, and indeed that they were racist. That is such a shocking indictment of the kind of people who were leading the Remain campaign and still are. And it's those very same people who are calling now for the loser's vote, for the people's vote, the second referendum. That's what they're calling for. Now, within the Labour Party, and I here speak as a Labour MP, and I have to say that I did say to the local Member of Parliament for Gateshead, Ian Mearns, that I was coming. I always have to tell him, and he did very clearly say, I don't know how he actually voted in the referendum, but he did say that he did not support a second referendum. So I'm passing that on to you as a people of Gateshead. Whatever. He also did say that I should say that we should be very careful to remember that we're in Gateshead and not looking out the window at the little village called Newcastle just over the river. But now the Labour Party manifesto, and I'm very proud to be a Labour MP and have been for 29 years, but our manifesto at the last election was very clear that we would honour the referendum result, leave the single market, leave the customs union. But we've allowed a bunch of Remain MPs to try and slow the process down in Parliament, to do what they can to stop us leaving. And as I've said many times, people say, don't you feel a bit lonely? Because there aren't many of you in Parliament, although we know that there are millions of Labour supporters out there who support leaving. And I say, no, I'm not, because I've got my colleagues, people like Graham Stringer, Kelvin Hopkins, Frank Field, John Mann, and we are a little group who really do our best to try and get the Labour Party to stick to what it promised. But also I look back and I feel proud that I'm following in the footsteps of those people who many of you will know and remember very well. People like Peter Shore, Tony Benn, Hugh Gateskill, and of course Barbara Castle, who, if she was here today, would be on this platform telling us that we had to get a proper Leave vote. Because they understood then, way back, even when we first joined, and remember, we weren't asked, did we want to join? We were joined, and then we were asked 2 years later, did we want to stay? She warned then that this was a project that was going to lead to a single currency, was going to lead to all kinds of things, an army and a federal Europe. All of the things she has said have come true. And we have allowed, right throughout that, for treaty after treaty after treaty to go through Parliament and be voted through Parliament, sometimes not even with a vote, and yet the people have never, ever been asked. We look at the original vote to join, the accession treaty, then we had the Single Market Act, then we had Maastricht, then we had Amsterdam, then we had Nice, then we had Lisbon. And those very same people who allowed that to happen are now saying that Parliament, it's dreadful. How could we possibly not allow Parliament to have the final say on everything when actually they've allowed year after year after year for the EU to take more and more democracy away from our country? But of course, the European Union thought, of course, that we would go for a second referendum, because that's what has happened in the past. We know every time there was a country that had a referendum, the Republic of Ireland had a referendum, it said no to the treaty, and after a few months they were asked to vote again. And I genuinely think that the European Union Commission, shocked as they were by our vote 2 years ago, thought that after a little while, a little bit of buttering up, a few more drinks in Brussels or whatever, that we would turn round and have another referendum. But you know, we're British, and we are not... We are not going to allow the bullies in Brussels to make us have another referendum. We're not going to allow the bullies in this country who are trying to get us to have a second referendum for that to happen. Now, I think the Prime Minister from the beginning was far, far too trusting on what the EU were going to do. She should have known, as all of us here know, that you cannot negotiate with the EU. The EU do not have the negotiation in terms of goodwill and decency. And even at the very beginning, when our negotiators proposed ways of engaging with the EU, Brussels blocked it, they ridiculed it, and they constantly briefed against it, supported, of course, by a media in this country that sometimes you wonder whose side they're actually on. I hear the word BBC here, but I think we started by being far too nice. We started by implying that we wanted a deal at any price. We should have said right at the start that we want to trade freely with you, we want a free trade deal, it's in all our interests for that to happen, but if you don't want that, then we are perfectly happy to go over to World Trade Organization rules. Remember that the rest of the world deals very happily on World Trade Organization rules. And, you know, the idea that somehow this would be crashing out, these metaphors and words that the media come up with, this would not be crashing out. This would just be a different type of deal. And it would be a deal that long-term, I think, would actually be in our interests more than what is certainly being proposed under Chequers. Now, because I come from Northern Ireland, I want to say just a little bit about the border issue, because that has now become this huge shibboleth that's actually supposedly going to stop anything happening to get a good deal. The first thing we need to say and remind people is that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It's an integral part. And we can never allow any part of whatever arrangements come out of us leaving to have Northern Ireland treated any differently from the rest of the UK. And we need to remind ourselves, because again, this is something that the media get just, I don't know whether it's ignorance or just deliberate, but the whole thing about a hard border. The only reason there's ever been a hard border with lots of structures and cameras and police and so on was when the IRA were trying to bomb people in Northern Ireland, bringing over ammunition, bringing over weapons, and trying to blow up our British soldiers and our police officers. And of course then there had to be light security installations. But the idea that somehow the Belfast Agreement, which hardly mentions the border, the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, that somehow now is something that is on such a plinth that we have to, do everything to ensure that there isn't going to be a border. Well, of course we don't want to have a border, and there's absolutely no need to have a border there. But the Prime Minister does not seem to want to listen, and neither does the EU, and neither does the Irish government. And I think our message is very clear. I think I've said it before, but I think the reason the Irish government are playing this is because they're being very nice to the EU. I think probably either the Taoiseach Varadkar or Coveney, the foreign minister, want to be one of those very well-paid EU commissioners, and you have to say the right things if you want to be an EU commissioner. But I do think that there's a border there already. They have different excise duties. They have different VAT rates. They have different currency. All of these things are handled quite well by people cooperating. And that's what we have to get. And we have to say very clearly, we're not going to build a hard border. We're not going to build a border. The EU have said they're not going to build a border. The Irish government has said they're not going to build a border. So who's going to build this border? So our Prime Minister should simply say to the EU and to the Irish government, you go ahead, you build a border. We have no intention of building a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Now, I do think that some of the leaders of the People's Vote are actually not particularly nice people. Now, that's not to say that millions of people who voted Remain in all decency are not perfectly nice people. But some of the leaders of the Remain campaign, and let's not forget too that a lot of people who voted Remain are now just saying, get on with it. You know, we've accepted the referendum result, we want to get on with it. But the people who are leading the People's Vote, and it is some of the sort of same people who we all know well, the Tony Blairs, the Michael Heseltines, the Mandelsons, Peter Watt. He was up here, this area, wasn't he? And then, of course, Nick Clegg. And you will have seen today, of course, that Nick Clegg has got himself a brilliant new job in America, running Facebook. Well, I'm not on Facebook, and I certainly won't be going on Facebook now. But one of the nastiest things I think that's been said, and I really do think is nasty, is the way in which some of the Remain leaders have basically pointed out and said it publicly that all the old codgers, all the old people who voted to Brexit would soon be dying out, and therefore we should ignore them. Now, I find that the most shocking thing that anyone could possibly say, because you people who perhaps feel some of you are the people they were referring to, are precisely the people who saved this country, who worked hard, who gave up so much to make sure that we can live in the kind of democracy that we're living now. So I think that is a real indictment. I do think, for me, the whole question of leaving is not about the economy or about economics. It's actually about democracy. The European Union is squeezing democracy out of the member states, and it's the prime aim of the European Commission to continue to do that, because their sole purpose is to make the European Union into what they see as a global power, and a power that they alone control. And I do not understand why any of us would want to be part of that institution anymore. But we need to be confident about our country, and we need to show that we're confident about our country. We can have differences about who's in government, but ultimately we believe in our country, believe in the United Kingdom. We're proud to be British, and it's not us that have to fear about what happens when we leave. It's actually the EU, if you look around what's happening in the rest of Europe. And that's why they don't want us to leave. And they have a contempt for democracy and a contempt for people. And this is mirrored by the kind of establishment who continually run our country down. The negative briefings that we get, everything is negative. Everything that is bad that happens is because of Brexit, and if it's something good, it's despite Brexit. And we're getting this constantly, and that is their aim, to put the morale of people like us here, to bring that down. And we're not going to let them happen, because across the European Union, people are rebelling against the EU. It's happening in Italy, it's happening all over and they're losing. So we need to be building a new kind of democracy that opponents of the referendum said it wasn't really valid because the referendum was passed by Parliament. And yet, during my nearly 30 years in Parliament, EU diktats have gone through week after week without any discussion because we can't actually change them. And it's that kind of democracy that we have lost in our country. We may not agree with things that government do, but at least we can kick them out. We can't kick out the EU Commission. So the clock is ticking, and as has already been said, the idea of increasing the months of a transition are just not acceptable. The battle that we thought we'd won when I left Gateshead that 2.5 years ago, we thought we had won, has to be restarted. Those opposing Brexit started their campaign the day after the result. We believed in democracy. We didn't feel that we had to do anything other than have the will of the people accepted. But we now are in a situation where we have to fight back. We have to show those corporate interests who come out with all their statistics and so on, the delaying tactics, the more and more moaning that goes on about the EU and about needing more time. More time isn't going to sort out the Irish border. The Irish border could be sorted out tomorrow if the will was there. More time isn't going to change any of our desire to leave the customs union and to leave the single market. So I would say to you tonight, you have a responsibility too. Individually, you can do things. Can't just leave it to politicians, and you certainly can't leave it to many of the current bunch of politicians on this issue. We need a clean break. We need no extension to transition. We have to challenge wherever we can the cry for a second referendum. We have to get those people who have accepted the result for them to also realise that we are moving forward. And we have to challenge the doom mongers. And each one of you can do your bit, has been said. Go and see your MP, go and write to people, get into the local paper, get onto the radio, and we will show this government or the opposition or any other party that wants to get involved in this, that we are not going to allow the votes of 17.4 million people to be overturned by an establishment who have always derided the way we voted. Let's go for it.
Well done. Brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Kate. Isn't she great, ladies and gentlemen? An MP of the highest integrity, with the strongest principles, if only there were about another 600 like her. Anyway, we are a cross-party group and indeed a group of no party. Our next speaker is the Conservative MP for Clwyd West since 2005. He's a former Secretary of State for Wales, and he was appointed Minister for Brexit after the referendum for the first year until the general election last year. And he was doing a good job. The truth be told, he was doing too good a job in the eyes of the Prime Minister. So she got rid of him. But he is a passionate Brexiteer, another person of strong principles. Before we welcome David Jones to the stage, let's just see a few clips of him in action.
I think that the European Union has pretty cynically weaponised the issue of the Northern Ireland border.
We were told prior to the referendum by the Treasury that if we voted to leave we would enter immediate recession. The IMF told us that the economy would contract by as much as 9.5%. Both were made to look extremely foolish.
How concerned are you?
Well, I'm extremely concerned because the country voted to leave the European Union, and leaving the European Union means no longer being part of the apparatus of the European Union, including Single Market Customs Union and European Court of Justice.
We'll be obliged to inform the European Union that patience is not infinite, and that if they continue to refuse to discuss our future relationship, then we will assume that they're not serious about doing so, and we will consider other options.
Please welcome to the stage, David Jones, MP.
Well, thank you for that welcome. And didn't I look grumpy in those videos? As Richard announced, I am a Welshman, and I'm very proud to be Welsh. But let me tell you this too. I'm extremely proud to be here in the northeast of England this evening. And let me tell you why. I was the leader of the Vote Leave campaign in Wales. And, yeah. And on the night of the 23rd of June 2016, I found myself in a leisure centre on Deeside waiting for the results to come through. And it was nip and tuck, touch and go. And then the results came in from Sunderland. And then right across the northeast, we saw results saying that the people of this part of the country wanted to leave. And on the morning of the 24th of June, when it became clear that the country had voted to leave the European Union, which was, incidentally, the proudest day of my life, I realised that it was the northeast of England that had shown the way to the rebirth of British independence. So can I thank you all for what you've done for this country? And let me say this too. I want to tell you something about the campaign in Wales. We were told that Wales would never vote to leave the European Union. We were told that Wales was too poor and too stupid to vote to leave the European Union. We were told that Wales depended too much upon European money. And Wales voted to leave the European Union. Indeed, Wales voted to leave the European Union by a bigger margin than the UK as a whole. And let me tell you why Wales voted to leave the European Union. Because I was involved in that campaign for over 6 months. And it wasn't to do with money. Because the people of Wales realised that it wasn't European money, it was British money that we'd sent coming back to us. And it wasn't, as Kate said, something to do with xenophobia. It was nothing to do with that. It was quite simple. The people of Wales, like the UK as a whole, simply wanted their country back. And they realised that they were not living in a democracy, and Kate is entirely right. Every single piece of European law is initiated by the European Commission. The European Commission consists of men and women who have been appointed to those positions, not elected. If you want to get rid of a European Commissioner through the ballot box, tough luck, because you can't. It is not a democracy, it is the ultimate bureaucracy, and that is what we're living in. And the people of Wales decided quite properly they didn't want to have anything to do with that. They wanted their country back. They wanted to run their own affairs. They wanted politicians like me to represent them. And if we were no good, they wanted the right to kick us out, which they can't do with commissioners. So, that was a wonderful night. And as things went, I was very pleased because I was appointed to be a Minister of State at the new Department for Exiting the European Union. And my job was to get through Parliament the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill. That was the piece of legislation that empowered the government to serve the notice under Article 50. And we got it through. And we served that notice. And we served that notice, and it started the clock ticking, which means that under international law, on the 29th of March next year, this country will be independent once again. Which, if this audience is anything to go by, is quite a popular thing. And the Prime Minister at Lancaster House on the 17th of January last year made a very good speech. She said that what the government was looking to achieve with the European Union was a broad, free trade agreement, the sort of agreement that sovereign states conclude with one another. And everybody, I think, in this room would agree that a free trade relationship with the European Union would be highly desirable. And then, of course, we had the election. And, of course, the parliamentary arithmetic became a bit more difficult, didn't it? And what we also did, and this was the big mistake that we made, we actually agreed to the European Union's sequencing of the negotiations. We agreed that before we could go on to talk about the future relationship, we would have to come to terms on money, inevitably, on the issue of citizens' rights, reasonably, and also on the question of the Irish border. And what the European Union did, quite cynically, as I said in that grumpy video, was to weaponize the issue of the Irish border. And when you consider the appalling problems that have taken place in Ireland over the years, can you think of a more cynical thing to do? But that's what they did. And of course, since then, the government has tied itself up in knots, trying to overcome this issue of the Irish border, to have a free border, an open border. Well, the fact is that at the moment, there is a border in Ireland. There's a fiscal border, there's a VAT border, there's a regulatory border, quite apart from being a political border. But the point is, it's an invisible border. And there is no reason at all why there should not, post-Brexit, continue to be an invisible border in Ireland. And everybody's agreed about that. The Irish Taoiseach Varadkar has said that there will be no border there. We heard from Monsieur Juncker, who said that again. Yes? I might say Nick Clegg again. Mr. Juncker says there'll be no border there either. And so far as we're concerned, we have no intention of putting up any border infrastructure. So who is going to put this border up? It's a wholly cynical ruse that the European Union have come up with. And as a consequence, we're now at the situation where the government is suggesting that the entire country should continue for what appears to be an indefinite period in the customs union. That we should be subject to EU regulations, which in turn means being subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, which means that we will not be free and independent again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, consider this. The vote in 2016 was the biggest popular vote in the history of this country. 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. I don't need to remind you of that. You're well aware of it. But the people who do need reminding are the people up in Westminster. Kate and I accepted. Because they are now in this little bubble, talking about all sorts of little pieces of legislation, of how they can achieve this, how they can achieve that. how they can make sure that things are as frictionless as possible. Look, the fact is, people voted simply to leave the European Union. That's what they voted for. So, before I sit down, let me say this. Everybody in this room is a patriot. Everybody in this room fully understands that the United Kingdom, the 5th largest economy in the world, can stand on its own feet and make a success of itself in the world. But you know, I think that some of your MPs need reminding of that. So if I ask one thing of you this evening, just one thing, is when you go home this evening, can you please go on your computers and send an email to your Member of Parliament and say that you demand that he or she does everything in their power to make sure that this country is free again, which means no longer being part of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Sitting next to Kate. Isn't it brilliant? And to help you, ladies and gentlemen, on every seat there is a pamphlet which has the names and addresses of all the local MPs to help you write to them and to know where to go to their surgeries. Our third speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is also from the Labour Party. He's a director of the organisation that has worked tirelessly before the referendum and since, called Labour Leave. He's a councillor in Ashford in Kent, and as a Labour supporter, he understands that Brexit, a proper Brexit, will help the poorest, the most vulnerable in society, the best and the most. He's a committed Brexiteer. He's an absolutely fantastic speaker. Before we welcome Brendan Chiltern to the stage, let's just see him in action on the video.
I think a lot of voters, particularly Labour Leave voters, of which there are about 4 million in the country, will be very concerned.
Around this country now, fishing fleets have gone, fishing stocks are destroyed because of the common fisheries policy. A policy that sees our fish bought by European fishermen and sold back to us because we can't control our own waters. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Kicking the poorest in the world in the teeth because they can't access European markets. That is an internationalist. And as a Labour person wants to be, because I want to see the poorest in the world raised out of poverty, I want us out so our aid means something.
Please welcome to the stage Brendan Chiltern.
Comrades and friends, it's great to be back here in Gateshead, and can I begin by thanking the chairman and Leave Means Leave for organising this nationwide Save Brexit tour, because it's so necessary. And I'm delighted to be here in Gateshead, which voted 57% to leave the European Union. Well done, Gateshead. And I want to ask you, do you still want Brexit? Yes! Do you still believe in an independent Britain? Yes! And will you promise to support this cause till the bitter end despite all they throw against us? Yes! Friends, we need to be careful because our democracy is under threat like never before. A ghastly cartel of big business, big politics and big finance. The people's vote. That squalid band who are publicly and in full view thwarting our democracy for the first time in modern political history. They are using powerful finance to infiltrate our system to deny the will of the people. Leaving the European Union is very simple. It means leaving the single market. It means leaving the customs union. It means ending the jurisdiction of the courts, and it means leaving the political institutions. We, the people, have spoken. We're not asking Westminster to implement it. We are demanding they implement it. And I have to say, here, we're in the northeast this evening, the dominant political party in this region of the country is the party I belong to, the Labour Party. And even though we have a Conservative government, it is the responsibility of Labour MPs to honour the vote as well. The People's Vote campaign, let's call them what they are, the second referendum campaign. That's what they are, the losers in our democracy. They are trying, with their big money, to infiltrate our party, to try and get our policy changed. And I say to any Labour members in this hall, in this city and in this region, reject them, chase them out. They have no part in our movement and in our democracy. Clement Attlee was the first Labour Prime Minister, and he kept us out of the European common steel and coal community because, in his own words, the Durham miners wouldn't wear it. They were right then, and I'm delighted the National Union of Miners still today opposes our membership of the European Union. And it was that fine Labour leader in the 60s, Hugh Gateskill, who said that going into the common market would mean the end of 1,000 years of British history, and he was completely right. But, friends, when we leave next year, that history will start again. And in 1983, it was the then Labour leader Michael Foot who pledged to take this country out of the European Union. And we mustn't forget the great Labour figures of the past, Peter Shaw, Barbara Castle, who stood up for the cause. But the hero of mine is one Tony Benn, who won the first referendum in the 70s, who led the campaign against membership and who, until his dying days, was opposed to the European Union. And I say to those now who claim to be the heirs of Benn, Corbyn and McDonnell, be true to that tradition. Be true to that tradition and take us out of the European Union. Every single vote that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell made in the Commons right up until June 2016 was against the common market, the European Union and the economic community. Come back to the fold. Come back and be with us. We're the progressives. We're the opportunists. We believe in this country. We don't bow down to Brussels, because you cannot build Jerusalem in Brussels. You can only build it here in England's green and pleasant land. And most of us in this hall want to see change in our country in a host of directions. Some of the very policies that my party is advocating cannot be implemented while we're in the European Union. We can't bring the railways back into public ownership. I'm sick to death of those extortionate prices. Let's leave the EU and bring back real control to the people in the form of ownership of public services. We cannot intervene in sections of the economy to prop up jobs. We couldn't save steel because it was against state aid rules given us by Brussels. We want our democracy back. And we also want a fair but firm, open immigration system that doesn't give exclusivity to Europe, but is fair, free, and open to the world. And all of us in this hall have a special duty to the young people in this country who are being sold a myth that if we leave, they won't be able to travel, they won't be able to study, they won't be able to go abroad without roaming charges, which I'm sure is on your top priority list, as it is mine. This is not what it's about. It is about a nation reborn and confident, democratic and open to the world. And we must say to our young people, Europe is not their oyster, the world is in the 21st century. And I want to thank all of you who have campaigned. I know I recognise faces in the audience tonight who campaigned in the streets in the referendum, on street stalls, public meetings, canvassing, talking to friends and neighbours. Their campaign was funded, organised and battled away by the elites, the big business. Ours was a campaign of the people. We won then, and if they make us do it, we'll win again. Because the new dividing line in British politics isn't between left and right, leave, remain. It is between Democrats and anti-democrats. And I've got an idea here. Why don't we start by getting rid of some of those anti-democrats, by getting rid of the lords who have thwarted Brexit from day one. We are the change makers. We took on everything they threw against us. The corporates, the banks, the elites, the press, everyone. They haven't accepted it. So will you today promise that until we leave, until we're out of that market, out of that customs union, out of the courts and out of the political institutions, to fight, fight, fight and fight again until we've got our sovereignty, freedom and liberty? Ours is a campaign steeped in the radical traditions of this country, challenging the powerful and those who have the vested interests. We are the internationalists. We are the Democrats. If we keep faith to what we fought for and faith in what we believe, there is nothing we or this country can achieve. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
Leave a gap for Isabel, so go to the one with the...
I've got to give Kate her pen.
Next one. Isn't he fantastic? We need him in the House of Commons because he just tells it as it is. Our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, needs little introduction. But it's worth taking a little bit of time to remind ourselves what he has achieved. He's battled for this cause for about 25 years. He's possibly the original Brexiteer. Without question, he has changed the course of British political history for the better. He will go down as one of the most influential political figures in this country since the Second World War. And he is a man of incredible courage. He has faced abuse, vilification, and threats to his family from the establishment, from the anti-democrats that Brendan referred to, and he has dealt with it all, and he's pushed on. He's even survived a plane crash that would have killed most of us. And talk about style. He dragged himself out. He wiped away the blood from his eyes. He dusted himself down. He reached into his pocket and he pulled out a cigarette and lit a fag. He's a true patriot, ladies and gentlemen. Before we welcome him to the stage, let's just see him in action recently.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air.
The compromise that she put forward at Chequers last week, the PM's country home, frankly was a betrayal. I'm going to try and get the people to let their members of Parliament know they will not accept being betrayed.
And I tell you what, if I have to do this again, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
We had a referendum. We voted for something. Our politicians should deliver this.
We have made our minds up in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country.
I trust the voice of the people more than the politicians.
Please welcome to the stage Nigel Farage.
As I was walking to the stage, and I thought, it's like the last night of the proms, but so far, I've not seen you waving that flag, so come on! Thank you very much. Well, I was here 3 days before that referendum. Kate was on the stage as well, and I have to say they were very nervous days, because up against us, we had the massed ranks of the establishment. We had former prime ministers telling us what a mistake it would be to vote Brexit. People like John Major. People like Tony Blair. Even former deputy prime ministers. People like Nick Clegg. Who today, of course, has got a highly paid job in Silicon Valley in California, all of which proves you don't need to have open borders to give job opportunities to low-skilled migrants. It's a new one. It's a new one. Well, the hell with him. I hope he hates that. But it was Clegg in 2014 who I was debating against in the European election run-up, when I said one of the reasons I wanted to leave the European Union is because not only was it expansionist, not only was it developing its own foreign policy, but that it wanted to build its own European army. And I believe we'd be far better off sticking with NATO rather than having our army governed from Brussels. And Clegg said I was a dangerous fantasist for even pretending that a European army was in prospect, when now, of course, we know that it is. And folks, when they tell us that we won the referendum by not telling the truth, the older, wiser ones among you will know we have faced 50 years of lies over this. 50 years of lies. Of being told it was just a common market and not to worry our little heads. Well, we battled on through those weeks, and it wasn't just British politicians, of course.
They came from all over the world. The experts, the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, they even sent across President Obama, if you remember, to tell us we'd be at the back of the queue. And I've got to tell you that when 10 o'clock came on that evening of the 23rd of June, it was the end of a long campaign. In fact, for me, it was the end of a 25-year campaign. And I can't tell you how nervous, how tense I felt. And then the second result came up on the television, and we were there at a party in London, and we stood there in silence, and the chap got up and said, "I, the returning officer for Sunderland City Council, announced the results of the referendum. Remain 51,900 votes." And I stood there and wondered what was to come. Leave 80. That's all I heard. 83,000. So it's what I call the Sunderland roar. It was the moment we realised that it was the North East what done it, wasn't it? Well, it was a very happy, joyous day. And let me tell you this. Whatever short-term difficulties we're going through, and boy, we are, some real difficulties with our Prime Minister, some real difficulties with a massive shift of position of the Labour Party, some real difficulties with, once again, they brought back Project Fear, haven't they? They're telling us we'll lose jobs. They're telling us that Nissan will close down their plant. They're telling us that if Brexit happens, plagues of black locusts will descend across our land. But what I do know is that ultimately, whatever happens in this battle, June the 23rd, 2016, will go down as history as the day we won that first great battle, and it will, before long, become a public holiday known as Independence Day. You can keep waving them, you know. I mean, don't be shy. Now, I've just come back from Brussels. I flew into Newcastle this morning from Brussels, where the Union Jack was not being waved by the British Prime Minister. I have to say, from the start of all of this, I do think the way that she's been treated by those Eurocrats just about sums up the kind of people we're dealing with. You see, when you have the government of Europe made up of unelected bureaucrats, people you can't vote for, people you can't remove, what you get is power without accountability. But the way they've treated Theresa May has been disgusting. I mean, did you see the dinner the other night? The leaders met. The rest of them went off to have dinner, leaving her on her own and giving her the address for the kebab shop round the corner. I mean, I'm not a particular fan of Theresa May, but you know something? She is still our leader, and for her to be disrespected by that bunch of gangsters in Brussels is disgraceful. But sadly, she has yielded to that pressure. And the woman who stood up and said, Brexit means Brexit, now I'm sorry to say, what she really means is Brexit means Remain. Brexit in name only. And what I saw in Brussels over the last 48 hours was not just a national humiliation for our nation, but what I saw was a Prime Minister actively and willfully attempting to betray the wishes of 17.4 million people in the greatest democratic exercise that this nation has ever seen. And the message that must come from this room and from all over this country is we will not put up with it. But I'm afraid that it isn't just her, and it isn't just the leadership of the Conservative Party. I'm sorry to say that the Labour Party are doing much the same thing. I heard Sir Keir Starmer on the radio. Yeah, I know who. None of these people are very well known, are they? But he's actually rather important because he's, you know, the shadow Brexit secretary. But you're right. You know, we used to know who our politicians were, didn't we? We knew who they were on both sides of the House, because in the old days, they were real people. In the old days, they'd done proper jobs. Now they're a bunch of dull careerists in the main, at least that's what I find. But Labour's position now is that they too think we should stay part of a customs union. Now look, folks, whether it's Labour or Conservative, the fact is this. We, the people, were told in this referendum that it was our decision. And we were told in that leaflet that David Cameron delivered through every door in this land, do you remember? Yes. £9 million of your money was used to do it. Yes. And how I enjoyed myself posting it back through the door of number 10, Downing Street. But we were told we will respect the vote, we will implement your decision. And if that wasn't enough, we didn't just vote for Brexit once, we did it again in June 2017 in that general election, when both our major parties promised, and 85% of the electorate voted for parties saying, we will take you out of the European Union and its single market. All right, it couldn't be clearer. So we cannot allow for Brexit to be watered down. We cannot allow for it to be delayed. We cannot allow for a transition period to go on until the next general election. We cannot allow for the Prime Minister to give away yet another £20 billion of our money, which could build countless hospitals up and down this land. We cannot allow for this to happen. We've got to stand up, folks, and I'm sorry to say this, we've got to stand up and fight again. You see, in the cosy confines of London, of Westminster, within the M25, they think they can water down this Brexit. They think they can betray your vote, and they think they can get away with it. But nobody really has made them feel the heat. Now, if I've got one apology for you, it's this. Before the referendum, we had a pretty united campaign of people from across the political spectrum fighting to get back the sovereignty, self-determination, and, here's the big word, the independence of our country. But after we'd won, I guess in a way we all went back to our day jobs. We kind of trusted that the government would carry out the will of the people, and we've left a huge vacuum for the other side. That side has now been filled with George Soros's money. And if you can afford the train fare, you can go tomorrow if you want, down to London to the people's vote. What a bloody cheek. We had the people's vote and we won it. Now, if you want, you can go to London tomorrow and listen to the campaign for a second referendum addressed by such luminaries as Sir Bob Geldof. So good for you if that's what you want to go and do. The truth of it is, folks, they are in the minority. Only 20% of people in this country actually want us to remain. Of those that voted Remain, a third of those now say, we're Democrats, we respect the vote. And you know, the message that I'm getting all across the country, I'm getting it from voters, but in particular, I'm getting it from businesses. And please, please don't get the impression that business is for the European Union. It's big business that is for the European Union, and not the 5.2 million people in this country that run their own businesses or act as sole traders and are the backbone of the economy of our nation. Now, the message is simple. The message is, can we please just get on with it? That is what our country wants. That is what our country wants. Now we need your help. We've reformed under this banner of Leave Means Leave. We are of no party, we're of all parties. We have significant business figures backing us too. We had last Saturday in Torquay Tim Martin, the boss of Wetherspoons. No, well, I'm all for him too, because I don't know whether you know this about me, but I quite like a pint, you know. But I love what Tim said last week. He said, if these people in Europe want to bully us, want to talk us down, want to try and give us an impossible deal, well, do you know what he said? In my pubs, I'm no longer buying any spirits or any wines from the whole of Europe. How about that? You see, here's the point. Here's the point. That as consumers, we are the people that have the power. We buy far more goods from Europe than they sell to us. We should have the upper hand in these negotiations, but we don't. So what I want you to do, folks, I don't want you to write to your MPs. I want you to turn up outside their offices. I want you queuing round the block. I want you to make them feel the heat. I want you to tell them, if they here in the northeast betray your Brexit vote, you will never vote for them again. Make them feel the pressure. It is wrong that we should even be here. I wanted to say how delighted I was to be back in the northeast with the friendliest group of people in the whole of England, which you are. Which you are. But I shouldn't have to be here. You shouldn't have to be here. But we are being let down by our political class. We have within our grasp a great prize. An opportunity to take something back that is worth more than GDP figures, that is worth more than any economic prediction. We have within our grasp the right to get back something so powerful, something so emotional, something that, as we know, those generations that went before us fought for and in many cases died for. Our country. Our country. And we are going to win. We are going to win. We are going to win.
Do you want to go? Just drop. Go there. Isn't he fantastic? I think it's fair to say, ladies and gentlemen, he hasn't lost his touch, has he? He's enjoying it. But we shouldn't have to be here. Now, before we finish, we're going to have a question and answer session. And to conduct that, we're going to ask the author and political commentator, Isabel Oakeshott, to come onto the stage to lead the Q&A.
Thank you. So we've asked people to submit questions, and we don't have time to take too many, but there's a nice selection here, some of which are obviously for certain members of the panel, starting with you, Nigel, actually. Got a question from Robert from North Shields, and Actually, it's something that kind of plays to what you were talking about just now in terms of, you know, we shouldn't have to be here. And after the referendum, you sort of stepped back from frontline politics. And the question from Robert is whether you regret that decision now. And what was your thinking behind it at that point?
Well, I'd spent 25 years of my life building up a political party from nothing into winning the European elections of 2014, forcing David Cameron, before he had the total nervous breakdown that I think I was giving him, into giving us a referendum. I thought I'd done my bit. I did, Isabel. I did, after the referendum, say to the Conservative government, once Cameron had gone, I wasn't sorry to see him go, I've got to tell you. I did say to them that if I could help with the renegotiations in Europe in any way at all, I'd be happy to do so. I wouldn't want a penny in payment for doing it. And they said I wasn't wanted. So I felt I'd done my bit, and I admit we stepped back a little bit. We all stepped back a little bit. We thought we'd won, but we're back now. And Robert, let me just say this to you. You're from North Shields. There's a great harbour, isn't there, in North Shields? And sadly, there aren't many fishing boats in that harbour in North Shields. But when we leave the European Union properly and get back 200 miles of the North Sea, which is our own exclusive economic zone, there'll be more jobs back in North Shields.
So the next question is from Linda, also from North Shields. And I think this is probably one for you, Kate, actually. We've talked a lot on the platform tonight about the Irish border issue. And Linda is wondering something that has actually occurred to me a little bit, which is why the Irish border question was never really mentioned during the referendum campaign. She's actually done a bit of research. She reckons that out of some 2,000 articles that she found of news coverage in the referendum, only 4 mentioned the Irish border. And I remember, I mean, as a commentator, so many events I went to, it never came up. Why do you think that is, Kate?
Well, because anyone who really knew about what was happening in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, knew that there was free movement. A lot of smuggling goes on at different times because obviously excise duties are different, and that is all handled by cameras at a distance and by intelligence. And then when the border police, they actually call them customs officials, get any intelligence, they come and they can stop a lorry. So it's all is perfectly possible. And what happened, you see, and this is what's so depressing really, is that it was picked up very early on by the Irish government. Not the initial Taoiseach after we voted leave, the Taoiseach, Enda Kenny, was actually allowing his officials to have meetings with British officials talking about understanding that there were going to be these issues about certain things and trying to get some agreement. He then, when Varadkar came in, he stopped those meetings and he turned it into a political tool. And working with the EU then saw this, you know, let's face it, out of 27 countries, Ireland's a very small country in terms of the European Union. And in the overall extent of the trading that goes on, it's a very tiny amount. And yet it deliberately has been brought up to being this big issue. And what is just so horrifies me that Theresa May, supposedly Conservative and Unionist party, has spent her whole time listening more to Irish governments, nationalists in Northern Ireland, and the EU than those people in Northern Ireland who are pro-union and who are very proud to be British. And that makes me very sad.
Yeah, Nigel.
I'm one of the very few people that actually knows these characters. You know, I know Tusk, I know Barnier, I know Juncker, obviously. But, well, Juncker's quite fun. Not much use after lunch, but anyway. But Barnier, who are you? Yeah. Barnier, they've posed an Irish question to which, for them, no answer is acceptable. Nothing the British government says would, in the eyes of Barnier, solve the Irish question as he's posed it. Let me tell you why he's done it. And I know this guy well. The one thing they do not want the United Kingdom to do is to break free of the European Union's rulebook. They don't want us to be able to make life easier for British businesses. They don't want us to become competitive. They don't want us to become successful. And that is why they've managed to get both the Tory and Labour parties trapped into this concept of us staying in a customs union. They are winning this battle of the renegotiation, and the reason is our leaders and our leading spokesmen in both our major parties don't believe in Brexit. Because if you believed in Brexit, you'd know it's the right thing to do.
David, there's huge uncertainty now, isn't there, about what's going to actually happen in Parliament, you know, with the parliamentary arithmetic as it is. And Luke from Morpeth asks what we think on the panel about extending the transition period. I think we can probably answer that in one simple word. But I wonder if you could just talk us a bit through how you see the next few weeks playing out and whether you think there is a majority in the Commons for an extension to the transition period.
I think that the suggestion that we should remain in the customs union for a further transitional period will go down like a lead balloon in most parts of the House of Commons. And it's not just from the Brexiteers. We're actually hearing today from people on the other side of the Conservative Party, people like Nick Bowles, who say that this is completely unacceptable. The problem is, of course, that being part of the customs union carries a price tag. We would have to pay around 18 to 20 billion pounds per annum for 1 year just to remain in the customs union. It wouldn't solve the issue of the Irish border, which is the suggestion. All that it would do is to prolong the process. It would be kicking the can down the road. There is no purpose whatever in remaining in the customs union. It does nothing but harm to this country. It would make us poorer. It wouldn't make us 1 second freer. And I believe that the House of Commons would reject it. The problem is, however, that this has been seized upon by the European Union. Of course, it would be, wouldn't it? Not only would we be making those payments to the EU, we wouldn't have the benefit of our rebate, and it's very doubtful whether we would have the benefit of the sort of structural funding or the agricultural support payments that we enjoy at the moment. So it would be a completely penal relationship. I can't see that that is going to fly, but I'm afraid that it has gone down extremely badly with my colleagues in the House of Commons. We were discussing it yesterday. Everyone was absolutely dismayed, and I don't think it's a runner, and I think it will be rejected.
Just ask a question of my own, David, which was, what was it like for you going into the Brexit department in those early days? I mean, we read a lot at the time about the resistance amongst civil servants, even in that department, to actually leaving the EU. What was the experience like for you?
Well, I mean, so far as I was concerned, it was the dream job, wasn't it? You know, I mean, I'd spent 40-odd years hating the European Union, and now I had the opportunity of helping to get us out of it. Look, let's be fair to the civil service. By and large, civil servants are very dedicated people. They will perform the functions that the government asks them to do. I think that the big problem is in the top echelons of the civil service. The trouble is, of course, that none of those people can remember a time when the United Kingdom was not part of the European Union. So the thought of leaving the EU is absolutely catastrophic. You know, it's like having your left leg amputated. It's as bad as that. And there was no doubt in my mind that the top civil servants were extremely resistant to what was happening, that they thought it was a thoroughly bad idea, and that has actually been proven by the contributions that have been made in the House of Lords by past civil servants, top civil servants, who have made the most appalling comments about the Brexit process. So I think I found that the civil servants I worked with in DEXU were dedicated people. I think that the problems were at the higher levels. And I think that in due course, I think that a clear out of the top personnel is probably required.
Thank you. Brendan, you spoke really powerfully about the Labour greats that were Eurosceptic. We have a question from Cameron from Blyth asking how you feel about the way the Labour leader has handled Brexit. And you sort of addressed that actually in your speech. But I wonder whether you feel that come the hour, the Labour leadership will somehow come good on all this.
Well, I think, first of all, congratulations from coming from Blythe. Your MP campaigned to leave, Ronnie Campbell, opposes a second referendum. It's a good Labour Brexiteer. I think Jeremy Corbyn will have to make a choice between whether or not he wants to implement his manifesto or stay in the European Union. The choice is as simple as that. I think the Labour Party is, in the parliamentary party, overwhelmingly Remain. But 70% of our constituencies voted Leave, up to 5 million Labour voters voted Leave. And I think if he wants to keep those voters, he needs to become one of us.
Right, I'm now going to hand back over to Leave Means Leave Chairman John Longworth, who's going to wrap up this evening.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our evening is coming to a close. But before we depart for a cup of tea, I would like to ask you to do a few things for me. The first thing I would like you to do is show your appreciation for the panel. Now, whether or not you believe in Brexit, or you're just worried about the £600 for every man, woman and child in the country Theresa May has promised the EU in order to leave, this is not just about the European Union. This is now about democracy in Britain itself. So the second thing I'm going to ask you to do again is to contact your MP, to go and see your MP, and to sign up to support Leave Means Leave on our website. And I have one final request, because I want us to send a very clear message to number 10 tonight. I would like you all to stand up and hold up your banners. Hold up your Leave Means Leave and your Believe in Britain and your Save Brexit banners. Then we can get a fantastic picture of you. And I'm going to ask you, what do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Give yourselves a round of applause. And have a safe journey home.